Shalom and welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and today we're revisiting with an old friend, Robert Oscar Lopez, author of Jephthahs Daughters, Innocent Casualties in the War for Family Equality. Robert, welcome back to the program.
Thank you very much for having me on. It's always a pleasure to speak to you.
Robert was an associate professor of English at Cal State University Northridge before he was forced to leave. He now teaches at Southwest Bible Theological Seminary in Dallas. He was raised by a lesbian mother with the help of her lifelong female partner in Buffalo, New York. Later, he went on to receive an undergraduate degree from Yale and his doctorate and master's in English classics from State University of New York at Buffalo. As a queer-identified teenager and young man, he was conservative but took a liberal position on the issue of gay parenting, though this has changed. As an adult in his late 20s, he reconnected with his biological father, fell in love with a woman, and became a father. These events, along with his research, led him to a position against gay marriage and eventually drove him to a conservative political philosophy which better suited the evangelical Christianity he professed by his late 30s. Early writings of his has appeared in liberal outlets such as Buffalo Report and Counterpunch, particularly because of his staunch anti-war position during the Bush years. Later, he served in the United States Army Reserves and developed his career as an openly conservative writer, authoring colorful conservative American Conversations with the Ancients from Wheatley to Whitman in 2011 and Jephthahs Daughters. He has published over 100 essays on American thinker, public discourse, Ethica Politica, Federalist, Daily Caller, and First Things. By 2012, he became an explicit opponent of gay adoption and marriage. In 2015, he and his 5 other adults raised in LGBT homes submitted amicus briefs opposing gay marriage before the Supreme Court of the United States. He speaks French, Spanish, Italian, and Portuguese, and is competent in reading and writing Greek, Latin, and German. Robert, when we first met in February and I read your bio, I was just fascinated that the world that you grew up in and the environment of what would have been defined as normal and what was defined in my world as normal were complete opposites. And yet today, the world that I grew up in the early 50s would be considered to be abnormal. I would be considered to be a racist, a homophobe, an Islamophobe. I would be considered to be an enemy of all things liberal. Yet I grew up in a liberal Jewish home where my mother still supports a democratic agenda. My sister still supports a democratic agenda, and I'm the only Jewish believer in the family. So I know what it's like to break away from a culture. And it took me 44 years before I came to faith in Jesus, and I didn't leave being Jewish. I left rejecting Jesus as the Messiah. In your world, you left the lifestyle and all aspects of the lifestyle and became an outsider looking in and evaluating from a much new, different lens the world you came from, and came to a crossroads and had to make decisions for yourself. What was that like?
I think it was probably similar to what you just described about growing up Jewish and then coming to Jesus. It was painful. That's the most important thing, because so much of your interaction with other people, when people are talking to you and telling you about how they spent their week, it often refers to their family. They called their mother, or they went to their dad's house, or they're helping their brother or sister out with those things. I have a wife and 2 children, and I feel very blessed about that, and I'm very glad that I have that in my life. But it's a daily feeling of pain, because I did have to lose all of the people that I was raised with, and that's why I feel very passionate about this issue, because gay families will always put children in that position, because automatically you're severed from one of your biological parents just as a de facto condition of the home. And then you're left with these two same-sex parents whose decision to do that to you is based in an ideology which, if you reject, will result in you having to lose those two people as well. So it's just a bad situation all around. You feel constantly alienated, and you have to fight against the envy and the resentment of the fact that so many other people never had to face choices like this. They never had to really confront wounds that run that deep and that are that recurring, because you never get to close the wound. It's constantly being brought up again and again. And in my case, when I openly spoke about this, then I had to have the whole gay community coming after me and abusing me for what I believe. But ultimately, I think there are a lot of other people's situations such as yours that I can look to and say that what I'm going through, what I've gone through, isn't unique. Other people have gone through it, and Jesus Christ certainly warned us about this. He said, if you're not willing to say goodbye to your mother and father and your brother and sister and follow him, then you are not worthy of being his follower.
You know, it's so interesting you say that, because I talk all the time about the fact that mainstream Christianity in America knows nothing of counting the cost of being a Christian. Nothing. They gave up nothing. They were born into it. They were raised in it. It was a lifestyle. It was the norm. When I left, and I didn't leave Judaism, I'm still Jewish. I didn't become a Gentile. Those are my only two choices. I became a Jewish believer, but I had to be willing to lose 14 million relatives. I needed to be willing to be not welcomed in my family home. I needed to be willing to be alienated by my two sisters, by my mother, by my father, by my Jewish grandparents, to say, no, he's not one of us anymore, and he's dead. You rejected homosexual parenting from the inside out. You didn't become a conservative philosopher that wrote an expository opinion based on psychological research. You were raised in a home with lesbian parents, alienated from your biological heterosexual father.
Right.
Were you in your upbringing giving opportunity to connect with him, or were you completely alienated from him?
No, I knew who he was. We didn't really practice shared custody. I went back and I looked up the records after all of these stories broke, because I wanted to figure out what the timeline was. And I don't have any memories of my father living in our home. I believe that he moved out of our home actually later than I had originally thought. I think he moved out when I was 2 or 3. But he probably got an apartment and was sort of living separated before that. But the actual divorce did not go through until I think about 1980, if I'm not mistaken. That's when my mother drafted a new will, and she placed her female partner as the person who was supposed to be the executor on the event of her death. So that would have meant that during that period of the 70s, from when I was about 1.5 years old until I was about 9, my father was part of our family's life. He just wasn't part of my life. And I think that partly what this resulted from was the fact that my mother, from what I can tell, it looks like she intentionally got pregnant with my dad when they were in the process of breaking up, and she really wanted to raise me in a different way from the other kids. She wanted me to be her kid and not my dad's kid, and she really wanted me to have a close relationship to her partner. So because of that, there were a number of complications that arose. Part of it is that my brothers and sisters did have a relationship with my dad, and they did not experience a lot of what I'm talking about. They didn't have that close relationship with my mom's partner that I had. In many ways, I was closer to my mother's partner than I was to my mother. And so as you can see, this is all very complicated. And then on top of it, you're dealing with a politically stressful topic like homosexuality, which everybody gets emotional about, and I think which everyone reacts to in a very narcissistic way. People react to the issue based on where they stand, and it's hard for people to step away and to say, okay, yeah, I have a gay friend, but that doesn't mean that I'm going to completely dismiss this person who has concerns about the effect of homosexuality on culture. Do you know what I'm saying? Homosexuality as a political issue makes everybody very selfish and very self-referential. So you add that to what's already an unstable, difficult family structure, and then on top of it, then my own confusion about my sex life left me open really to predatory behavior, and that's exactly what happened. At the age of 13, I was initiated into homosexuality, and it took me a very long time to figure out that that's not who I was, and then it took me even longer to figure out that that's not who anybody is, that this is not a practice that God designed any of us for. And so when I got to that stage and I realized that there was a biblical position that I had to take, that homosexuality itself is wrong and that nobody should engage in this behavior, then at that point I had to lose everything. I had to lose all of my friends. I had to lose my job because so much of it was tied into, if not a complete wholesale acceptance of the LGBT lobby's agenda, there were these intermediate positions that some people would take, like I'm against surrogacy, but I'm okay with sperm banking. I'm against sperm banking, but I'm okay with adoption. I'm I'm against adoption, but I'm okay with marriage. At some point, I had to just say, the entire thing is wrong. Nobody should be engaging in gay sex. We don't want this in society. This is a bad thing, and that's why in the Bible, the punishments to societies that encourage it appear to be collective. That we get that from Genesis 19 and from Romans 1. That societies that allow this to flourish are punished as a society because everybody really becomes complicit in the problems that homosexuality brings.
Do you think we've taken this issue, LGBTQ++, piled it into the same ideology category, family, as we have Islam and immigration and illegal aliens, and made it a social welfare issue, and that every American is entitled to choose everything about everything, and therefore the law should be established to allow for everybody to be anything. And the social construct then becomes, we are permissive, we have legislated this permissiveness, and therefore you can't be against anything that does not bring criminal harm as defined by the criminal code to anyone else. We have this social code now, and we're moving these agendas, which is marriage, which is under a legal structure. Now we're moving into, and there's a civil code, not a criminal, but we're moving it into the area of personal choice completely. And since the declaration is, and it's so odd to me because an atheist lesbian couple would declare that they have the God-given right to marry whoever they want.
Right. Well, I would say that there are a couple distinctions that we have to draw. This is very important. Of all of those causes you mentioned about immigration and civil rights and these other things, LGBT is very different because there really was no shared history of oppression on that scale. This is completely made up. There really was no gay community. There was no grouping of people that we can separate out from the rest of the population and say, okay, here are their grievances. This is what was done to them. But largely because there really is no gay identity. I mean, it's an activity. Homosexuality is an activity that anybody can do and anybody can choose not to do. And so they began with the false premise that somehow it was part of their being. And then from there, they created this false history that the entire millennia of Christian history were based on oppressing this group of people who never really existed. When we're talking about women or racial minorities, it's very different. Those are groups that did have a very strong historical claim to having suffered something. They were targeted. Their identities were much more substantial. I think with Islam, that is somewhat similar to the LGBTQ situation because the Muslim parts of the world were very imperialistic. They had a lot of power. They have a lot of oil. There is a lot of money coming from those places. So it's kind of disingenuous to make it seem as though Muslims are suffering in the same way that African Americans have suffered in the United States. So I don't think that Islamophobia can be equated to racism. I think those are two, all of that's jumbled. So I would say that at best, LGBT politics is similar to the hype about Islamophobia, but I think it's even more disingenuous because ultimately LGBTQ politics is run by people who are very wealthy, very privileged, and who are ultimately just fighting for the power to get what they want, and that gives them pleasure, and to basically crush anybody who criticizes them. And that's something that I think even Muslims are not at anywhere near that scale. So I think this is a unique movement. It's set apart from all the other claims on the left. I think that there was a lot that was good about the American left in the 20th century, and the LGBT movement pretty much poisoned it. They have corrupted that entire side of the political spectrum.
In our evaluation of what we consider to be criminal in this country, we assign a value or criteria. And that criteria is there must be a victim.
Right.
There are that quote-unquote victimless crimes, but predominantly our criminal system is based up of trying someone as a crime against a victim, and there is a victim.
You have to have a plaintiff or a complainant. Right?
There you go. In order to have a suit against someone or an action against someone. Thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah.
Your analysis of this, after having lived it, freed yourself from it, turned completely around and are on the opposite side of this, find this to be, based on your evaluation, your research, what you and Rivka have identified in the contents of this book, Jephthahs Daughters, Innocent Casualties in the War for Family Equality, that there are victims in this.
There are absolutely victims. First of all, I think that it's important that we not fall for this definition of crimes where there has to be a direct damage to somebody else, because very often the people who are hurt by things that we do that are morally wrong can be ourselves in the case of something like suicide, or it can be something that we didn't intend to hurt somebody else, but they were kind of collateral damage to the bad decisions that we made. So even keeping that in mind, I think that the LGBT movement and all of the things that they've demanded, they have victimized people, because literally their desire to have same-sex parenting families requires that children lose what they were born with. The first natural born right of every single human being is a relationship to a man who is their father and a relationship to a woman who is their mother. Adoption as a ritual and as a tradition has always functioned based on the fact that children who have been deprived of one of those relationships needs to be restored. They need to have something to replace what they lost. So you give them another mother and father, because you can't totally heal their loss, but you can give them something that approximates what was taken from them. In order to set up same-sex parenting families, people had to completely remove the best interests of the child from the equation, and they had to silence all of the people like myself and the over 70 people that we quote in that book, all of the other offspring who essentially said, I didn't want to lose my mother and father. This was wrong. We have to be silenced, and they can't just silence us. They have to demonize us and discredit us. And so there was a whole campaign that I talk about in that book in the section 6 of all the kind of McCarthyism and defamation that they engaged in to discredit the children who had been raised by gay parents. So the very people that they said that they were going to love and protect, they attacked. And one thing that I would like to point out with this is that during all of the attacks on me and Rivka, Rivka, she lost her job in Ohio at a university. I lost my job. There are many people who, this went very, very deep. You could put dollars and cents on what we lost. Nobody who was a prominent gay parenting advocate came forward and said, this is wrong. If, in fact, the gay community had a lot of gay adults who had good natural instincts as parents, at some point, that parental instinct would have set in, and they would have watched what was going on, and they would have said, you know what, that could be my kid in the future, and we shouldn't do that to gay people's children. So I'm going to defend this person who's being treated badly because I don't want my child to be treated badly. Instead, what the gay parents universally reacted with was a sense that reflected back on them. They said, what these people are saying reflects badly on me as a gay adult, so I'm going to attack them. So that's not the spirit of a parent. Do you know what I'm saying? That is not a natural parenting instinct. It's sort of like when Solomon was presented with the two women both claiming the baby, and the woman who said, okay, if you're going to split the baby in half, let the other woman have the baby. And Solomon said, that is the mother, because you know that someone who really truly is a parent, they will put the needs of the child over themselves. And I do not see that anywhere in the LGBT community. I don't see gay, quote unquote, parents putting the children before them. I see them constantly seeing the children as an accessory or as something to accent themselves, their own struggle, and to make themselves feel more important.
We're talking with Robert Oscar Lopez, a passionate dialogue with someone who came out of the world of having same-sex parents, who was indoctrinated into a same-sex lifestyle, who came to the realization that this was not natural, it was not good. In fact, it is a social disaster. And he became more not just your everyday child, he became the victim of something that was being perpetrated upon him by a lesbian mother and her partner, and introduction and indoctrination to a lesbian life, gay and lesbian lifestyle. And when he came out of it, he was ostracized, he was persecuted, and he has become an advocate for opening up the eyes of the world to the impact of this. If we look at things that have been successful in society, they are that which has been replicated. You look at the model of a store, and it's Joseph and Sons, and 7 generations of the same family in the furniture business providing quality and quality services. You know that father passed down to son in each generation a system of value that still exists today. But when we look at the gay, lesbian, bisexual community and their offspring, we find a confused and disenfranchised group of offspring that if this was the perfect life, why would not 100% of their offspring be embracing it? And we're finding that as they move away from it, and they find that it's been forced upon them, and it's an indoctrination, and it is more cultish than it is creative, then we're finding that this more vocal position is coming under more and more attack because it's filled with more fact than opinion. And that is what Jephthahs Daughters, innocent casualties in the war for family equality. When we come back from break, we're going to dig more into this, about this entire revolution, which is failing in theory and succeeding in practice. We'll be right back. Shalom. I'm the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, Executive Director of Igniting a Nation and host of the daily TV program Revealing the Truth, seen live every Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. Central Standard Time at www.ianbn.com, and then replayed throughout the day and night via our website. All of our segments can be seen on the Igniting a Nation YouTube channel. Since our launch in January of this year, we've expanded our global reach to over 54 countries with a social media following of over 125,000. Our commitment is to bring you the most in-depth interviews with authors, subject matter experts, and thought leaders from around the world. We have interviewed guests from Israel, Brazil, England, India, and all across North America. All of our authors are featured on the Books and Media page on our website, www.ianbn.com. There you can find a direct link to the book you want to order, and we receive a small commission directly from Amazon. There is no cost to you for this service. In addition to our daily teachings and interviews, we make available to you the archive of all of the interviews on our YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram channels. Our live program is available from our homepage, and there is never a charge to you for any of this access. We made the decision long ago that we would remain a commercial-free resource that would not be influenced by any pressure from any outside company. There are only two ways that we are able to continue to operate this ministry and provide you with the only live 4-hour daily Christian television talk show program. The first is through your support and tax-deductible contributions to Igniting a Nation. These can be made directly through the donate button on the website or sent through the mail to Igniting a Nation, 2700 Corporate Drive, Suite 120, Birmingham, Alabama, 35242. The other way we support the program is by offering you a unique opportunity to have access to over 10 years worth of teachings on a subscription basis. The teaching archives contains all of my prior sermons, Torah studies, prophecy in the news videos, and much more for the low subscription price of $5 per month. This subscription grants you unlimited access to over 800 hours of content not available elsewhere, and is updated weekly with the most current prophecy classes. In addition to 20 hours of original TV programming each weekday, we invite you to join us live every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday evenings for our Prophecy in the News classes. The times and locations are listed on our events page on the website www.ianbn.com. Every day, you and I are faced with the challenge of where we will go to hear the truth. We are committed to bring you the only program of its kind that covers the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. We cannot do this without your support. Since we launched on January 5th, 2017, we have aired over 300 individual teachings, interviews, and commentaries not available anywhere else. We are now working side by side with almost every major Christian publishing house to bring you the most in-depth feature interviews possible. Our 1-hour features address every subject that affects the believer's life. We are hearing of salvations from the Middle East, Africa, and all across the United States. Lives are being changed every day, and we have only just begun. Our mission is to become your trusted resource and grant you access to the people, tools, and information you need to grow in your relationship with the Lord. You can help us by liking us on social media and through your financial support. We know you have many choices in who you support, but we are prayerfully asking you to consider helping us keep revealing the truth, true to our calling, to cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth like no other program available. Donate today and help us bring the message to the four corners of the earth. Visit www.ianbn.com and donate, buy a book, or subscribe to our teaching archives. Without you, we do not exist. Shalom and welcome back to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and we're talking with Robert Oscar Lopez, former Associate Professor of English at Cal State, now teaching in Western Baptist Theological Seminary in Dallas, raised by a lesbian mother, and now fully out of a homosexual lifestyle into a perfectly normal Christian marriage, wife, 2 children, teaching in a Baptist Theological Seminary, and has committed a good part of his life to the identification of how immoral this entire agenda is. And you boiled it down to one word that I think would resonate with our audience, that is a biblical concept and one in which we're quite familiar with, that all gay, lesbian lifestyle falls into the category of what word?
Sodomy.
Sodomy.
There's Sodom. The story of Sodom is not only presented very early in the Bible, in the book of Genesis, but Sodom is constantly referenced again and again throughout the prophets. Jesus Christ mentions Sodom and over again. It was not presented just as a random story. It was definitely a biblical warning in the form of a history, also as a prophecy, also as a law, that societies cannot deviate from God's design. And even if it seems as though sodomy is something that people want to do and individuals, and you can't see the harm done by it, eventually the harm will be collective. It will hurt everyone in society. Everyone's affected by it. That's why Paul opens up his letter to the Romans with this discussion historically of what happened in the ancient world within societies that encouraged sodomy. He doesn't just talk about the act, he lists all of these sins and character flaws that end up running rampant through society. So he talks about the fact that in societies where there was homosexuality, people are disobedient to parents, people hate God, people become envious and backstabbing, they lie about each other, they become deceitful, all of these different things, because ultimately your design by God was defined quite a bit by sex. That's where you come from. You first come into existence as a spirit in the middle of an act of lovemaking between a man and a woman, and God created men and women for each other. So if you deviate from that, really a lot of things in society fall apart. It's not just a small issue. And I know that's painful because everybody that I know has someone in their life, a brother, a sister, a neighbor, a coworker who's gay, but you have to separate out that person's choices from who they are as a child of God and what they were designed for. So,
in your experience, you have uncovered that children of same-sex families share a number of common psychologically impactful conditions, which are now, because of the numbers, able to be trackable and verifiable, that the root cause of it is from the lifestyle that they were raised in.
Right.
Meaning we should be able to use this as actionable in defense of this being a harmful legislation for same-sex marriage or harmful legislation for gay adoption. How is that coming out? I know you filed amicus briefs. How is this coming out, and what kind of support are you getting for this?
We're not getting support, and that's a huge issue that I think especially Christians and conservatives need to get acting on. What happened when we submitted briefs to the court in 2015 was that all 9 of the Supreme Court justices, not only the liberal ones, all 9 of them completely ignored the testimony of the children who had been raised by gay parents and who are now coming out against gay marriage based on the impact on future children. That whole bank of testimony, that entire book that you're holding there, all of that was provided to those justices, and they threw it in the trash. Not even the conservative justices wanted to comment on it. And now that we see the next big case before the Supreme Court is about whether a Christian baker should be forced to bake a cake for a gay wedding. I think there are a lot of really important religious liberty issues there, but this is somewhat of a smaller scale and somewhat off the beaten path from the central issue that we tried to raise when gay marriage was brought up before the Supreme Court in earlier instances, because we were saying that the marriage contract is a social contract that protects other people beyond just the man and the woman getting married. In particular, it protects children. And if you rearrange the terms of that social contract, you are eventually going to have to deprive the children of property, of relationships, of support and stability. And this case has been made in very articulate ways. We have social science backing it up, but it gets constantly ignored. And I think over and over again, what we see is that conservative activists and Christian advocates, they're avoiding this issue, and I don't know why. I'm not going to conjecture or speculate why. I do know that when we went to Washington, D.C. in March of 2015, we could not get most of these conservative groups to host us. It's very hard to get a hearing. I've been on the phone with many offices on Capitol Hill, and I have yet to get one lawmaker who will talk to us. Typically what they do is they refer us to one of their interns who's very young, and you're basically brushed aside and given the side door. So I don't know why it is that this issue scares conservatives and Christians a great deal. I think Part of it might be that they're uncomfortable with us because a lot of us did actually enter the bisexual lifestyle or the gay lifestyle. I don't know, but it is a huge part of the equation. And I don't think, ultimately, to be honest with you, that fighting for the right of religious exceptions is going to accomplish anything, because unless you're willing to state publicly that homosexuality is itself harmful, it's going to be hard to make the case that you as a service provider, as a photographer or a florist, have such strong objections to someone's wedding that you're not going to provide a service to them. That argument doesn't make sense unless you're willing to say homosexuality is a serious crime that harms lots of people. And if you can't make that statement boldly and then cite the testimonies of people who can prove it, I think fighting for these religious exemptions is not going to go anywhere. Even if you win, you're not going to win really almost any headway at all.
I'm stunned. We have a country that just voted in a Republican president, a Republican Congress, both House and Senate. Gay marriage, the 2015 enactment of the redefinition of marriage law is subject to be appealed and repealed and overturned.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, that's one of the reasons why I think that it's important for people to take a step back from all of the accusations and to look at one important thing about Roy Moore, was that he kind of stands in a very small class of public figures who really fought against gay marriage as if it mattered. He was one of the very few who was actually, he sacrificed his position as a judge to take a stand on it.
Right. And
almost none of the other public figures in the Republican Party were willing to do that. So, I think even if you don't want to vote for him because you've bought into these sexual accusations, you have to ask yourself, why is he the only option? Where are all the rest of the Republicans on this? Why are they all, fighting these little side battles? And what have they done with all that money that they got from donors who gave them money saying, you're going to fight against gay marriage? I mean, you don't take all their money and then roll over and stop fighting once there's a Supreme Court decision. That's disappointing. So
these diagnosable abnormalities that are now appearing in children, and this is a modern phenomenon. You're a young man. It manifested in you, so we can assume that people in their 20s to 40s would be the prime targets, if you will, or prime, not really sure what the word would be.
We're the ones who are going to show the changes, yeah.
Exactly. So is the psychological community, is the psychiatric community, is the counseling community adding investigatory reports and results into this equation, supporting the negative impact of same-sex parenting?
You have a lot of very good research and wisdom that's coming out of the American College of Pediatricians that's led by Michelle Cretella. I know her personally. She's a wonderful, very brave scientist who she comes out and she basically tells it like it is. You have moments like the publication in the New Atlantis Journal of a study that was led by Paul McHugh, which very openly and unapologetically presented the data on these issues. Those things are very few and far between. The main professional organizations in the fields of medicine and law and research, they continue to actively censor any information that questions the same-sex parenting consensus, because for them it's convictional, essentially. They begin with the presumption that same-sex parenting is good because gay people are equal and good in every single way imaginable, and so they just reject the data from a book like mine out of hand immediately by saying, well, this data is not legitimate because the person who is publishing it opposes gay marriage, so therefore it must be false. And if you think about it, that's a complete violation of the standards of the profession, but that's what we see again and again with LGBT issues, is that these professional organizations are willing to violate their own standards.
You grew up in a marriage. Your mother divorced your father to quote unquote marry her female partner.
Well, they never did anything of that sort. They never got married, or yeah.
So they just lived together and acted in a two-mother household.
Right. Well, they were in a relationship the entire time that I was growing up. They had separate houses. We went on weekends together to an area. I saw my mom's partner every week, but they had separate houses. So they were very. This was an earlier period when gay parenting was not a thing. So I think that they managed their relationship in a way to minimize the impact on us, and I have to give them a huge amount of credit for that. My mother never tried to have her partner become an adoptive parent. You know, she never tried to legally change anything like that. So, and I think that was the right thing to do. I mean, you know, I wish that my mother never had a homosexual relationship, but the fact that she was in one doesn't change the fact that she did manage that relationship and those decisions in a very considerate way, taking into account the needs of her children. And that's something that I don't find a lot of the gay adults doing now as they're setting up these families. I think that they're doing the opposite. They're rushing to move in. They're wanting to make a big public statement about their commitment to each other. And then they're going and trying to get both of the gay adults involved in the kids' school, in their karate classes, in their band and their soccer practices, all those things. And so what that's doing is that's forcing the kid to be dragged into a lot of stress and tension and melodrama that they don't need. And the other problem is that a lot of these gay marriages that we're seeing coming out right now, they're not stable. They have very high divorce rates among the lesbians, and the gay men, their divorce rates are higher than heterosexuals, but not that much higher. But the problem with the gay male couples is that the majority of them are not monogamous. They have open relationships. And so all of that comes in when you read the testimonies of the adults who grew up with gay parents, because they all report all these things that cause them stress that you can see in the statistics. Because a lot of the ones who had lesbian mothers, there was a lot of instability, there were the breakups, there was a lot of fighting. The ones who had gay fathers, very often they found pornography around the house, or you know, the two gay dads would bring other partners into the home and have sex while the kids were in the house. So, you know, and then a lot of them, they got infected with HIV, and so the kids had to deal with the loss of their parents. So all of these things are impacts that you can see on the statistical level, and then you can also see on the personal level when you read the testimonials of what people report about having grown up in those homes.
Your book is not only a commentary on the current condition and the multiplicity of problems involved in same-sex marriages and same-sex homes, but you also speak to the church in very direct terms and say, where were you when all this was developing?
Yeah.
Where was that voice? And I'll look to this interview of a famous pastor who was asked about abortion and whether abortion was unjust in the eyes of God, and the response was, God is the only judge. No, Scripture tells you that death, the taking of a life, is unjust.
Right, yes.
That's a deflection. If you were asked to ask me as a minister of the gospel, does the Bible specifically prohibit homosexuality, I would, without equivocation, say it does, and we are outspoken about it. However, the church in general is in its own debate, and the ordination of gay and lesbian bishops and gay and lesbian ministers under the guise of an ordination of the Bible and holding this Bible, this transcript of God's Word, and ordaining a practicing homosexual minister, or ordaining a practicing lesbian woman and her partner into leadership of a church. What does that say is happening in the body of Christ today?
I think it's a huge collective mistake. It's a huge disaster, and God's judgment will be upon people who show such poor reasoning over and over and over again. I think the biggest mistake that a lot of these religious leaders make who want to take a middle ground or want to make compromises on the LGBT issues is that they think that somehow they're being kind to people, and they're not. I was actively involved in homosexuality through my teenage years and through much of my 20s, and I remember speaking to religious leaders, speaking to priests. I was Catholic at that time, and confiding this in them, and they really honestly did not express any alarm. They got really, really angry when I started having sex with a woman, believe it or not. That was what they got really judgmental about. And so, but I think that they thought in their mind that somehow they would lose me as a church member and as a Christian if they were too judgmental or if they were too harsh or they made me feel bad. But I look back on it now and I feel anger. I mean, I have to pray to overcome that anger, but I felt really betrayed by them because they were in a position to intervene. And that's what you have to do if you're following God's word. Christ did not tell us that we were going to be well loved by everybody. That's why this obsession with being winsome, which is a term that I hear again and again, I just don't find that biblically. I don't find that Christ said that you should make everyone feel good inside and make everyone feel. Now, obviously, you have to love people. And I think it's very loving to try to say, this is a movement that's endangering the flock that has been entrusted to me. Because you have to shepherd the sheep that are before you. You don't shepherd the sheep that you wish you had, right?
Right.
And so if you have people in your congregation or in your sphere of influence who are starting to go down this road and they're saying, I'm gay, you have to shepherd them. And that means that you have to protect them from an external influence, in this case, the LGBT movement, that has gotten into their head and that has convinced them of something that's wrong. Because in the end, you're harming them if you abet them and if you enable them and if you become an accomplice to the abuse by these people who are distorting their minds. A lot of the religious leaders that you're talking about, and I've dealt with a lot of them. I went to England, for instance, for the Synod of the Anglican Church when they made the decision to ban reparative therapy. A lot of the religious leaders who really want to position themselves as compromisers or as bridge builders to the LGBT community, if you look at it, the mistake that they make is they talk to the leaders of powerful gay organizations. And that really is absolutely not helpful at all. Those are all gay organizations that are very much devoted to defying the gospel and are hostile to the gospel. They should be talking to the average, everyday person who's questioning their sexuality or who has gone into the gay community. I guarantee you, if you go into a gay bar or go into a gay gathering and you just talk to the average person who's at that party, you can probably reach a lot of them, because a lot of them, they're just people who have been, they've been pushed into this, or they have fallen into this thrall, but they're not so closed off that they won't hear the truth. And there's very clear ways you can reach them by saying, is this the life that you wanted? Are you really happy? You can get that to them by saying that. But if instead you're going to sit down with the president of GLAAD or the CEO of the Human Rights Campaign, what are you accomplishing? You're just cozying up to people who are powerful and rich. And I don't see anywhere in the gospel where people are told that that's what you're supposed to do in order to spread God's word.
When we look at issues like this of a social justice, human behavior condition, which clearly, from a biblical worldview, falls in the category of sin, how do we respond to this in a day-to-day? I'm a Christian, I'm a believer, and I interact with and work in a company that is forced by the government to not prohibit the hiring of gay and lesbian employees who are more demonstrative of their lifestyle in the workplace than I would be able to demonstrate in the workplace as a heterosexual. How do we respond to that? How do we, what are the ways in which we can touch the lives through the ministry of Jesus Christ, which is to love them, which is to be kind to them, but to also be willing to say, there's another way.
Right. I think that there's the first thing you have to do is you have to determine who are you trying to intervene with. Are there other people involved here? So, for instance, if this is a school and you're talking about children who are students there, then obviously you're going to react with more urgency because this person's lifestyle choice is affecting people who have no choice but to be there, right? Now, if your coworker is someone who this is just their lifestyle choice and it's not really necessarily immediately impacting a lot of other people, then I think the most important thing is to first try to spread to them the love of Jesus Christ and the gospel, and to get them to the point where they're going to say, to be close to God is something that matters so much to me. To follow Jesus Christ is something that I want so badly that now I'm willing to put everything on the table, even things that I thought were sacrosanct, things that I thought were non-negotiable. I'm willing now to put them on the table, because if they get through the gospel and they get through the parts that are really loving and beautiful, they also have to get through the parts where Jesus says, you have to lay down your burdens and take up your cross and follow me now. And that means that everything is up for sacrifice for God, because what really matters is God. Once you get them to that point, then you can discuss all of the things in their life that they need to clean up. And this can be part of that. But I think in those types of situations, when you're talking to a coworker who's really deeply in the gay lifestyle, I do not recommend to people to just don't lead with the debate on gay issues, because it's going to go nowhere. You're going to be very frustrated, and it's going to be very hard for you to keep yourself from saying hurtful things or things that you regret, and the person's really not going to hear it. I think the most important thing is first to understand what Jesus Christ means for all of us, and what his coming to earth to be among mankind signified in the larger, larger picture of things. That's the most important thing I would say to people.
Solid wisdom, solid counsel from somebody that's lived through it. Not someone that this is theoretical, but the story of Jephthahs' daughters, innocent casualties in the war for family equality. Dr. Robert Oscar Lopez, thank you again for being a guest here on Revealing the Truth and being open, transparent, and passionate about this message of who the real victims are here, and it is the children. Thank you again for being with us.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure. Thanks.
We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll bring you the next edition of Revealing the Truth.